Northern Bank Robbery 20 years ago. So still clear in my memory anyway, of it all. And I suppose I was working, really. I like to think I was very, very young and a child then, but I wasn't. I was working. I was an adult. But, it was so extraordinary. I think we're very enthralled by bank robberies, and we think that they're this sort of, film scenario. Nobody gets hurt. The robbers kind of make off into the night with their loot, and you're almost kind of, by our nature, we nearly are, aren't we? Yeah. But this one was so different because there was such a fallout, really, politically and everything else with it. The Danske Bank it was, but it was called the Northern Bank. Is that right?
It was the Northern Bank at the time of the robbery, but it was in the process of being sold to Danske.
Okay.
And it was owned at the time by an Australian bank. So which in itself is interesting, that world of bank takeovers. And as you said, there's not a great deal of sympathy in the world for banks.
No.
And bank robberies, as a friend of mine said, when the news broke about this one, God, I wish I'd done that.
Yeah, it was just felt so daring. Yeah. So there was about 100 branches of the bank in the north of Ireland, and uniquely they were allowed print their own notes. Explain that, because I do remember often coming back from the north, and I'd be travelling between the north and the UK with those goddamn northern notes. Yeah, and so you'd pull them out in the UK and nobody would take them.
No, they wouldn't take them. And I remember taking, all of the banks were able to print their own bank notes. So the Northern Bank, the Ulster Bank, Irish Bank, Bank of Ireland, all had their own notes. As I thought it used to be here as well before the euro arrived. But they were allowed to print their own notes, and a lot of the notes that were taken away from the Northern Bank were Northern print run. And then we also have Bank of England notes in circulation. But just you saying that about taking those notes over to England and trying to spend them. I remember when I was living in England and when I was at university over there, my parents used to occasionally send me a letter with a fiver in it, go and get yourself a drink, and then you'd go and you'd try and spend the fiver and say, we won't take that.
It's bloody dud.
Yeah. I remember getting onto a bus trying to buy a ticket with a Northern Ulster Bank, probably an Ulster Bank fiver, and the guy said, no, we can't take that. And I said, but look, it's got the Queen's head on it. He said, I don't care if it's got the Queen's arse on it. I'm not taking it. It's not sterling.
Queen's arse.
Yeah.
Brilliant. But anyway, so they were printing their own notes.
They were printing their own notes. And that was kind of, in what happened after the robbery, that was important.
It was important. Yeah. And we'll revisit that, I suppose, later. But so it's the 19th of December 2004. You as an author, and at that point were what? You were in Belfast. You were just going to see family?
I was. So the robbery, the 19th of December, the night before the actual robbery, the families of Kevin McMullen and Chris Ward, both employees at the Northern Bank Cash Centre they worked in, so the basement of the Northern Bank headquarters, right in the centre of Belfast, had this cash centre where all the money that came over the counter and all the money that was going to go into cash machines, ATMs, that's where it was all kept. And that's where they worked. And their families were taken hostage on the night of the 19th of December, 2004, because they were the key holders the next day at the bank. The safe in the bank required 2 keys, needed 1 manager and 1 supervisor. Kevin was a manager, Chris was a supervisor. So 2 key holders had to be present to open the safe. And this was to prevent the kind of tiger kidnapping where a family gets taken hostage and someone is made to go in and open the safe or take money out. So they thought that if they had 2 key holders, there was less chance of that happening. But on the night of the 19th of December,
proved wrong.
They were proved wrong.
Now, Chris Ward was a guy, he was living in Downpatrick in County Down.
Kevin McMullen lived in Downpatrick. Chris lived in
Poleglass.
Yeah, in Poleglass.
Okay, sorry, wrong way around. So Chris Ward, start with him. He was younger, single guy. He usually sort of helped out in a bar. Was it in the GAA club?
He worked occasionally helped out in a bar on Sunday evenings. And on the 19th of December, he decided he wasn't going to go in. said he just didn't feel like it. So he didn't turn up for his shift at the bar. And so he was at home when the robbers came to take over his house, as he might not have been if he had gone in for that shift. Again, as with a lot of the events of that day and the next day, as the robbery was taking place, details like this became part of the investigation. Why had he not gone in to do his job? But he had a full-time job.
He just said he just didn't feel like it.
Yeah, stayed at home, watched football.
So he was there in the house in Poleglass with his father and mother, was it?
Father, mother, and his brother and his brother's girlfriend were in as well.
Yeah.
There was a knock at the door. He was very heavily involved with Glasgow Celtic, with the supporters club. And two guys turned up at the door, and he went to the door, said to his dad, leave it, you stay there, I'll go get it. He went to the door, and there's a guy there, and he says, we're here to talk about Celtic. And so he thought unusual, but not that unusual. So he sort of allowed this guy to come into the hall, and then behind him came a second and a third one. And they were had things pulled up over their mouths and noses. They had caps pulled down. And pretty quickly he realised that this was not about Celtic. There was something else going on. And these guys came in and they said, we're really here to talk about your work. And they meant the other work, the Northern Bank. And in they came, got the family together. And Chris's mother was quite unwell. And in fact, she recently died. She died just at the very beginning of May this year. But at that time, she wasn't particularly well. And they got the family all together and they said, we're going to be here. We're taking Chris away. People will stay here with you for the next 24 hours. If you do what we say, he's coming back. If you don't, no guarantees.
So did they at any point say to them, we're robbing the bank?
At that stage, they didn't. They just said it was to do with his work.
Yeah, so people kind of guessed.
I think they probably may have realised that it might have something to do with that. Chris was put into a car. He was told to go and get a bag and to put his work gear into it. And that bag became significant as well. It featured in the robbery. So he went and got a bag, an Umbro sports bag, and he was put into a car and he was driven. He didn't know where he was going at first, but then he saw a sign for Loughin Island, and he thought, well, that's where Kevin, his boss,
supervisor
worked. His manager worked, and he thought, okay, I know where we're going. And at the same time as his family's home was being taken over, Kevin McMullen was at home with his wife. They lived in quite an isolated spot outside the town of Loughin Island, or village of Loughin Island. And similarly, there was a knock at their door. And in this instance, the men who were at the door were dressed like policemen, and they were wearing high-vis vests, and the car had stripes or something on it that suggested a police car. And they said that there'd been an accident. Kevin went to the door. They said there'd been an accident, and that they needed him to. A member of his family was involved, and they needed him to identify the body. They then came into the house. And in contrast to what had happened in the Ward house, they were really quite violent. Guns were produced. A gun was put to Kevin's head. A gun was put to his wife Karen's head. They were trussed up, and there was quite a lot of violence used against them.
And I suppose what later emerges as well is that they had a really regular Sunday. This couple, they had their Sunday lunch. They had visited, or one of them had visited family, and they had done what they did pretty much every Sunday. There was nothing different about it. Nobody cancelled any plans or changed any arrangements. So what happens, Karen, is terrifying. And also from the minute really they walk into that house and they tell them a member of the family's dead, they don't tell them who. There is a cruelty, isn't there?
There's an extreme cruelty. Yeah. It's the contrast is enormous between what happens at the Ward house. And there's extreme violence and extreme kind of cruelty. And a lot of it is targeted at Karen McMullen, Kevin's wife. And she's taken away. She's taken out of the house. And she's told she's been taken somewhere where there will be a woman who will look after her. And she's taken to another place. She's blindfolded in the most horrific way. At one point, gaffer tape is taken out, and she realizes that when they say blindfold, they're going to tape her eyes shut. She asks them and eventually gets them to compromise, and they allow her to put a woolen hat on, which they pull down over her eyes, but they then tape that around her head really tightly. So that's how she spends the next 20 hours, is with this woolen hat taped across her eyes. So that she's taken away, and she's taken to her house, and as soon as she goes into the house, even with the blindfold on, she realizes there are no women in this house. In fact, there are just more men. And that's pretty terrifying in itself. Kevin is kept in the house, and Chris is brought in. And the night of the 19th into the 20th of December, the two of them are drilled in what they're going to do the next day. So that what's really important is that the robbers knew that on the Monday, the 20th of December, the day when there's the Monday after the last shopping weekend before Christmas, there could not be more money in a bank. And they know that Kevin and Chris are the key holders. The rota had only been finalised on the Friday. So this was the Sunday that they took over. So somehow they got this information. How they got it, again, becomes important. And they have kidnapped these two people, and they're now drilling them in what they're to do when they go into the bank the next day. And they're to go in, and they're told to behave as normal, except what they have to do in the course of the day is to take as much cash as possible out of the vault to which they are the key holders, and to load it eventually into a van.
So it's 6 a.m. when they go on the move and they report for work as usual. Their families are being held captive. Like, what is I suppose before we go on into the details of it, what's the atmosphere? These two families realise that this is about the bank, but they have been living in a place, they've been living through the Troubles, these people. So these masked men that come in, like, the worst case scenarios have happened so many times for so many families in situations like this, perhaps not for banking, but are either of the families thinking somebody's going to get away to get shot? I know we have ceasefire and all the rest of it, but there's still crime going on. And let's face it, still to this day, things just didn't grind to a halt by the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. What were the fears of the family?
Well, psychologically, for the family, I say, that it was not as bad in the Ward household as it was in Kevin and Karen McMullen's house. But nevertheless, psychologically, this is terrifying. You've got people in your house. In the first instance, your son has been taken away. And you've been told that there's, unless everything goes smoothly, something might happen. And so it would be reasonable to expect that it was possible that somebody could be murdered here. There had been a spate of these tiger kidnappings and robberies in the year and a bit leading into the Northern Bank robbery. So it may have come, and they had training. That's the other thing. The robbers knew that the employees of the Northern Bank headquarters, Kevin and Chris, had recently had training. They knew the name of the person who'd given them the training, and at one point said to them, "Don't listen.
Yeah,
don't listen to what
forget anything you've been told.
Forget everything you've been told.
Yeah.
This is what you're going to do." And they said certain things like, they referred to the Northern Bank as a shower of orange bastards.
Right.
So they knew that Kevin and Chris were both Catholic, and they were saying this. The assumption Karen said was, when they said this, that she said, as though we would agree with this, but we did not agree with this at all. And so there was a lot of knowledge, a lot of assumptions. And so even if the family may have thought, okay, there's, this feels more like robbery of a kind that we're not unfamiliar with, there was still that threat. These are people with guns. Now, there were no guns produced in the house in Poleglass, but there was, the threat that violence would be used or might be used. That was certainly implied.
And people were well aware of what these people were capable of. So 6 a.m. the following morning, they report for work as usual. And the plan was ultimately for the two of them to shift this cash as much as they could get and to let the other staff go home early? Was that it? So as they could, it's Christmas time, and that kind of a thing wouldn't be unusual at that seasonal time of year.
That's so, yeah, again, to say this is the cash centre. So the cash centre works to slightly different hours than the bank itself. So when all closes up upstairs and the counters are closed, the counting begins downstairs. So there was a late shift in the cash centre to deal with all the cash that has come in during the day. And it was the late shift they were on. That was what the robbers were particularly keen on. Who were the people who were going to be there at the end of the day? It's extraordinary when I went along to the trial, as I did. The detail of what that cash centre was like was actually quite flabbergasting, because somehow I suppose we think that when we hand over money that something that the whole operation is quite tidy. This was chaotic. There were bits of broken furniture down there. There were old bits of machinery. There were a lot of people working in a windowless basement. So it was a rather chaotic place. And but by the time you get towards the end of the day, there's only really a handful of people there, and the instructions to Kevin were that he was to dismiss everyone. He was to say there had been a problem. They were going to have to do a recount, and he and Chris were going to do it, and everybody else could go home. It wasn't unheard of, and because it was so close to Christmas, everybody just went, happy days.
Happy days, yeah. Exactly.
And away they went. So that left the two of them in there. Now, there was another bit of this in that the robbers also knew that Securicor vans delivered boxes of new banknotes to the bank, and that they had these particular seals on them that indicated they were new banknotes. The same kinds of boxes were also used. Now, this seems ridiculous, but they were also used for waste paper. They were just indicated with a different seal.
Right.
So what the robbers said to Kevin and Chris is, take off the seals that indicate new notes, replace them with seals that indicate waste paper, then take those boxes with banknotes, but disguised as waste paper by virtue of that seal, take those up at the end of the day, put them onto cages, trolleys, and wheel them out to the company that comes around to collect the waste paper. The van will be outside, and that's what they were to do. That's how they were to get the banknotes out. So they spent part of the day replacing these seals. The new banknote seals were taken off. The waste paper seals were put on. And so they did that. And but before that, the robbers had instructed them to take, for Chris, to fill his Umbro holdall, the one they'd told him to take from home, to fill that with banknotes and to leave the bank around about 6 o'clock in the evening. To leave the bank, walk round the corner. This is a shopping night, and I was in town on that evening. To leave the bank, it's just across the road from the City Hall. Bus stops right beside it. And he was to walk down a side street and to another bus stop, and he was to sit there, and somebody was to come along, and they were having a bit of conversation, and this guy was going to pick up the bag and walk away. And there was £1.2 million in that holdall. And that was the robbers' way of guaranteeing that the police weren't on to them.
Was it, or was it a security deposit for themselves if the rest of it didn't go?
Yeah, if they don't get that, at least we get this.
Yes, we've something in the bank.
We've got something. We've got something. Yeah. So 1.2 million, and then they walk back.
Does it make sense to you that, that sort of trip, that early sort of...
There's a whole lot of this doesn't make any sense to me, but then, I think maybe just the way you have to think about this is, I'm not a person who robs banks.
No,
the way...
Or am I? Yeah.
No, but do you know what I mean? You think to yourself, some of it seems strange. I mean, one of the strangest things is that for all the extraordinary care that they took, and there may have been up to 30 people involved, that might even be a conservative estimate how many people were involved. There may have been, a couple of dozen at least people involved in this. They take really, really careful, there's a lot of planning in it. But the people who eventually arrive in the van that drives away the money, are spotted by a member of the public who says that they're wearing ginger wigs, very kind of conspicuous ginger wigs, and she tips off a parking warden and who tips off the police. And the police only just narrowly miss them. By the time they come, the van's gone. They don't think anything of it. So that's strange. But the other thing about the bag of cash that Chris takes out and sets down, and somebody walks away, it does seem somewhat
It's
odd.
a bit risky, like, is it not? For the bigger prize is going to be what ultimately ends up being 26.5 million that they get. Why risk that? If he's caught going out with the bag to the bus stop scene, surely there's enough security on the place that surely in that, even back then in that cash counting, you at least have to show what's in your bag going in and out. No,
I see. The surely there is
the problem.
Yeah, is the problem. And again, the robbers knew this. And we were talking about the fact that the Northern Bank was owned at the time by an Australian bank and was just about to become the Danske Bank. It had originally been, I said at the very beginning, there's a little prologue about the Northern Bank and its history. So it starts in Belfast in the early 19th century as a small independent bank. And by the time we get to this robbery, 180 years later, it's part of a multinational. And one of the things that happened when the Australian bank took it over was they went on a cost-cutting drive, and they got rid of the security staff who had been employed by the bank, and they contracted that out. They contracted out to a cleaning firm called Maybin. And so the security was not what it had once been. And in fact, somebody who was employed in the old days of the Northern Bank, when you were staff, security were staff of the bank, when they did that, he said, the security here is a disgrace. It's no more than a kind of a buzz in and out. So the fact is that it was possible to walk out with a bag over your shoulder with 1.2
without showing.
Yeah, without showing.
Without even just opening it. Inoffensive.
Nothing at all.
Amazing. So two of them are a long time to try and keep your cool and not.
I don't know how you do it.
How do you do that? And at one point, I think, and it does come up again as part of something that the investigation focuses on Chris Ward, but he goes and buys some sandwiches, does he? And Chris,
a couple of times he does. He goes out to in fact, at one stage he goes and picks up a Christmas present from a jeweller's somewhere else in the city centre.
And the robbers are comfortable with him doing this, letting him out.
They seem to be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
It was like, go about your normal day. So now a couple of the visits to the newsagents around the corner from the bank, or just down the block from the bank, is so that they can make these. They have to make regular calls to the robbers to see how things are going. The first call Kevin is meant to make, or does make, but he can't get a signal. It's 2004. We're in 3G times. I don't know. Anyway, so he can't get a signal down there. He panics. He's really worried that if he doesn't make this call at 3:00,
his wife will be.
His wife's, yeah. And so he panics. And after that, they say, okay, well, Chris will make the rest of the calls. We won't alternate. Chris will make them. He will leave the bank to make the calls under the guise of going and picking up sandwiches and a bottle of Coke. And so that's the way it works after that. But he does also go out and pick up a Christmas present in the middle of the day. And as he says, I was told to act as normal, so I acted as normal.
So when evening comes, the others do go home. And this room you've described, this basement, this windowless basement with bits of furniture and everything around there, the two of them are there together, are they? And they're starting to load up.
Well, they're told then that what they have to do, once Chris comes back from delivering the 1.2 million, they're told then to start loading up these cages. And so this company that comes around to pick up rubbish, they're told to pack those boxes with the seals that indicate waste paper, and to surround that with bits of broken furniture and stuff. So that's what's supposedly been taken away. They have to go up in a lift, so they have to go into the vault. So the vault within the cash center itself, they have to go in there to do that, and then they load up the cages. They bring them up in a lift. They have to walk across to a door that leads out onto the street across the bullion bay. And there's a problem with that door; it's jamming. And so it has to be opened by hand. So the security guard who is on duty, and there's only one, and a mate of his who's waiting for a lift, comes and helps them with the door. And they are standing there with these metal cages, the ones you see in supermarkets, high-sided. And it's, there's at that stage, there's maybe 8 million, 10 million in that first one. Maybe more. And they're standing there, and the security guard is standing beside them, and the robbers are on the other side in the van. He goes back and, goes back behind his desk. They wheel the cages out onto the street, and they wheel them straight onto the van.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, the robbers come to them and say, they hand them a roll of baling wrap that you would use on a farm, and they say, we're coming back for a second run. Go down there, stick as many used notes as you can on there, and wind that around. And again,
so it looks like some sort of rubbish or a clear out.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they're coming back for a second run.
Yeah.
So not only do they have the audacity to do that on a shopping night, Christmas shopping night in the centre of town once, they come back and do it a second time.
So what happens with this tip-off that's been given to a parking warden? And
the parking warden goes off and finds a couple of cops, and the cops eventually walk around and look, and there's nothing there because the van's gone.
Okay.
So I think it's probably just after about 8 o'clock.
And are Ward and McMullen gone as well at this stage?
Yeah, I think the police just look and see there's nothing there, so they don't think anything of. They don't look and think, interesting that those guys with the ginger wigs were seen in a white van next door to a bank. Mm-hmm. They just look down there and they don't see the white van, they don't see the ginger wigs, and they just go on their way. After the second run, the robbers just say to Chris and Kevin, that's it, boys, you can go home. And off they go. And they are told to drive back to Chris's family home. Kevin's led to believe that his wife will be there as well, and when he gets there, she isn't. And again, she's still being held in really, really quite dire circumstances.
What instructions are they given as regards, the robbers know they're obviously going to call the police at some point? What instructions are they given?
Well, they're told that they're not to do. The robbers are still in the house when they get there. There's a couple of them there, and when they leave, they say you're not to phone the police until 11 o'clock. And so that's Kevin then, realizing his wife isn't there, has to get back to his place to see what's going on there. And after he goes, Chris Ward then makes a call as instructed to the police emergency line to report the robbery.
So what's happened, Karen McMullen, and when does she?
Karen was held in a house for the best part of the 20th of December. And then late in the evening, she's put into a car and she's driven to a forest. And she's taken out of the car, and she believes she's going to be murdered. She's absolutely convinced, as she has been at several times during the day, that she's going to be murdered. Mm-hmm. And that one of the last things that happened, there's one person in particular who she just refers to as the knife man. Just before she was blindfolded, she sees this guy in her house with this horrible looking knife, and she describes it so clearly. She says, I don't know what the use of it was, but it was for something, it was vicious. And he has this knife and it's stuck in the carpet. She sees this, and she knows that when she's blindfolded, she knows that the person who is with her all the way through this is the knife man. And even though she's terrified of him, she's more terrified of not being with him, of being handed over to other people. And she's also terrified about this blindfold, because she realizes that the blindfold, they don't want her to see or hear any. Well, hear, she does hear quite a lot, actually, and her powers of deduction from what she hears are extraordinary. But he keeps saying to her, you can see something, you know something about this place. And she says, no, I can't. And just before she's put into the car that takes her to the forest, he says they need the blindfold. And she says, no. And he said, we need it. And she's afraid that if they take the blindfold off, that will be the excuse to kill her.
They need it for forensics, presumably.
Yeah, forensics. And the extent to which they are schooled in forensics is, again, really, really, really quite remarkable. But they take the blindfold off her. She just squeezes her eyes shut and keeps them squeezed shut. She's taken into the forest. She's taken out of the car. She's walked through this forest. This is the middle of winter, and all she's wearing is a boiler suit because they've taken her clothes. And she's just convinced they're taking her to kill her because that's that kind of thing.
Like,
that kind of thing had happened. And she's made to lie down on the ground, and then she's told to count. And when she's finished counting, she can get up and go back out. But she's still waiting for the bullet in the head. And while she's lying there counting, she hears this explosion, and that's the car that she was taken there in. It's been set alight, again, to destroy any evidence that might be in it. And she says this remarkable thing. She says she hears this and she thinks, well, that would be the car being blown up because that's what they do in this country. It's that kind of resignation almost of the place that she lives in, of the kinds of things that happen. It's extraordinary.
Extraordinary line. And it does, of course, resonate through your book, that line, that idea of that this is the kind of thing that happens here. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.